"Your son doesn't belong here." That's what his teacher said to my face, like she was diagnosing a broken appliance, not talking about a child. There wasn't a hint of hesitation in her voice, or empathy. Just 6 words dropped like a gavel, right there in the middle of her cheerful, all-decorated classroom. The kind of place that pretends to be safe. I stared at her, waiting for a laugh, a backpedal, anything that would suggest I heard her wrong. Nothing. Ms. Trent folded her hands neatly over a manila folder and added, "He's too difficult for this setting. I really think he'd be better off elsewhere." Elsewhere. The way she said it made it sound like exile. Like she was doing us a favor by suggesting we vanish. I didn't answer. I couldn't yet. I just focused on keeping my hands still in my lap. Because the things I wanted to say, they wouldn't have been calm, and they wouldn't have been polite. Which, I guess, would have made me too difficult too. The thing is, up until recently, I really thought we were okay. Not perfect. But okay. I'm Rachel Thompson. 38. I lived just outside Minneapolis in a slightly crooked split-level house with a leaky kitchen faucet I keep saying I'll fix. I'm a freelance designer, which means I juggle half-finished logos and awkward Zoom calls between therapy appointments, lunch packing, and whatever obsession my son Ethan is into that week. Currently, building a replica of the Brooklyn Bridge out of popsicle sticks. Ethan is 8. Smart, funny, obsessive in the best way. He's autistic, formally diagnosed at 4, and I've never seen that as something broken to fix. He's sensitive to sound, loves patterns, panics if we lose routine, and asks more questions in a day than most people do in a week. Once, while we were eating pancakes, he asked, "Do trees get lonely in winter when their leaves are gone?" That's who he is. That's my boy. But not everyone sees what I see. Especially not Ms. Trent. When the school year started, I was hopeful. Ethan was placed in a general education 3rd grade class, with supports in place. Or so they said. I met Ms. Trent at orientation. She smiled too much, the forced kind, all teeth, like she was trying to sell me a used car. "I believe in inclusive learning," she said. "We welcome all kinds of kids here." I remember the pause she took after all kinds. It felt too long. But I ignored the instinct. I wanted to believe we were in a good place. I was tired of fighting. That optimism lasted about 10 days. Week 2, I got my first email. Ethan had difficulty following instructions today. He disrupted the math lesson with off-topic questions and refused to remain seated. I wrote back, polite as possible, reminding her of Ethan's sensory needs. I offered to send in a custom fidget kit, even a weighted lap pad. No reply. By October, the emails became weekly, sometimes daily. Ethan is not engaging appropriately. Ethan refuses to participate in group work. Ethan had an outburst during reading circle. Outburst? When I asked Ethan, he told me he cried after the fire alarm startled him. He said Ms. Trent told him to stop being dramatic and move on. The worst part? She was documenting everything like she was building a file. I started to feel like I was being warned, not informed. I requested a meeting. She pushed it twice. Then one Tuesday morning, Ethan sat down for breakfast, pushed his cereal away, and whispered, "I think my teacher doesn't like me." I tried to stay calm. "Why do you think that, buddy?" She rolled her eyes when I said I wanted to write about Mars. She told me I talk too much and make the other kids tired. Something in my chest cracked. He wasn't imagining it. And she wasn't hiding it. I demanded a meeting. She finally agreed. Which brings us back to those awful plastic chairs in her classroom, where I sat while Ms. Trent explained, with nauseating calm, that Ethan simply isn't a good fit. I asked what not a good fit meant, and what support from his IEP was actually being used. "Oh," she said, flipping through papers, "we try. But honestly, he gets distracted by the support tools more than they help. I stared. He needs those tools. They're part of his IEP. That's legally binding. She smiled like I'd just said something quaint. Rachel, I know this is hard to hear, she said, lowering her voice like we were sharing some secret. But I think deep down, you know he's not ready for this level. The other students are starting to notice. That's when I understood. This wasn't just a lack of training. She resented him. Saw him as a threat to the smooth little world she curated. She didn't want to support Ethan. She wanted him gone. I walked out of that meeting frozen. Rage humming behind my ribs. I picked up Ethan from aftercare and watched how his eyes scanned the sidewalk, how he looked over his shoulder like he was waiting for something to go wrong. I didn't cry that night. I didn't even rant. I just made a spaghetti and watched Ethan build a miniature crane with Legos. He gave me a thumbs up when it didn't collapse. Middle of the week, Ethan brought home a pink slip, a formal referral. Excessive talking. Off-task behavior. Disruption during writing period. His crime? He asked to write about Saturn's rings instead of the assigned topic, my favorite vacation. He's never been on a vacation. I signed the form. But under my name, I added, Ethan is meeting his IEP objective to sustain focus on areas of high interest through written expression. This referral contradicts that goal. I request a review of his supports. The next day, the form was returned to me with my note crossed out in red pen. And next to it, in hard, blocky letters. Parent does not understand classroom expectations. Middle hook, that sentence. That smug, condescending sentence, like I was some clueless bystander to my own child's needs, lit a fuse I didn't know I still had. But I didn't explode. Instead, I started rereading every document. Every note. Every line of his individualized education plan, the IEP, his legal right to accommodations. Things weren't lining up. Take this, for example, the IEP says he's allowed to use sensory headphones during quiet work time. But last week, Ethan said Ms. Trent took them away and told him he wasn't special and needed to adjust. That was the word she used. Adjust. And then there was the calm corner she promised to honor. Instead, she called it a baby zone in front of the whole class. Ethan heard her. She thought it was funny. And it wasn't just us. Another mom from the class, Mia's mom, texted me out of nowhere after pickup. Said she'd overheard Ms. Trent in the hallway joking with another teacher about her problem kid with too many charts. She was talking about Ethan. And laughing. So no. It wasn't misunderstanding. It was targeted. End hook, that Sunday night, I logged into the school portal to check Ethan's progress reports. His reading level? Marked as significantly below grade level. That didn't make sense. The week before, he'd read a 5th grade nonfiction book to me, cover to cover, without stumbling once. Either Ms. Trent didn't care to notice. Or she lied. And if she falsified that, what else had she covered up? I wasn't sure yet. But I was going to find out. I didn't attend the second parent-teacher conference. But I watched Ms. Trent walk out of the building, smiling, as if nothing had ever happened. I parked 2 blocks from the school that night, engine off, windows cracked, sitting in the dim quiet while the meeting she requested ticked by on the clock. I imagined her talking to the principal, framing it as another no-show, casting me as the uninvolved mother who wasn't worth making space for. I watched her walk to her car afterward, polished, confident, swinging her teacher tote like it held nothing heavier than a lunchbox and a sticker chart. She paused to chat with another teacher, then laughed at something they said. Her whole body language said ease. Control. Power. She believed I had disappeared. And in a way, I had. But not the way she thought. In the days that followed, I went silent. I stopped emailing. I stopped checking the school portal. I didn't sign the communication log she dutifully sent home in Ethan's backpack. I didn't offer fidget kits or behavior charts or bite my tongue through one more fake apology. I let her believe she'd won. And while she performed calm professionalism to the administration and charmed the PTA with her fall-themed bulletin boards, I watched from the shadows and waited. Because silence is a funny thing. It makes people bold. It makes people careless. I stopped showing up to everything, deliberately. No field trip permission slips, no volunteering for classroom crafts, no coordinating the winter bake sale like I had for the past 3 years. I let the other moms step over the gap I left and keep walking. I didn't wave to Ms. Trent at drop-off. I didn't meet her eyes. I stayed in the car, engine running, sunglasses on. And every time I saw her glance at me through the rearview mirror, I smiled just slightly, the kind of smile that says nothing while meaning everything. Meanwhile, she flourished. The school newsletter started mentioning her name with a little too much frequency, first for launching the new behavior reward system, then for organizing a classroom peer buddy initiative. One article praised her adaptability with diverse learners and commitment to uplifting student potential. I actually laughed when I read that. Uplifting? She spent most of her energy pushing Ethan down. But the district didn't know that. All they saw was a confident teacher with a clipboard and a Pinterest-worthy bulletin board. I knew better. And yet, even knowing what I did, I started to question myself. Because that's what happens when you're gaslit by a system, you start wondering if maybe you're just too sensitive. Maybe you are asking for too much. Maybe this is just how it works. So I made an appointment with the school counselor. I told myself it was just for information. I wasn't going to accuse, just check in. See if what I was feeling had a name. She met me in her office, a cozy little room with fake plants and mindfulness posters tacked crookedly to the walls. Her voice was soft. Her smile was constant. Well, I began, forcing a casual tone. I've had a few concerns with how Ethan's IEP is being handled. I'm trying to get a sense of what support looks like in practice. She folded her hands on her lap and tilted her head. Is Ethan reporting something specific? I hesitated. He's mentioned a few things. That he's discouraged from using his sensory tools. That he's told not to write about topics he's passionate about. That he's isolated during group time. Her smile never wavered. It's important to remember that 3rd grade is a big transition. Some kids do struggle more with independence at this stage. Ms. Trent is very experienced with this age group. She uses clear boundaries, which can feel harsh at first, but it's usually what helps long term. I stared at her for a moment, trying to make sense of what she was really saying. Are you saying it's normal for accommodations to be restricted without notice? She didn't flinch. Accommodations are always subject to teacher discretion when it comes to implementation. The goal is to build resilience. Resilience. I thanked her for her time and walked out of the room with my hands clenched in my coat pockets. That's when I knew. It wasn't just Ms. Trent. It was the system around her, polished, polite, insulated, quietly enabling people like her to chip away at kids like Ethan until they give up or leave. And I wasn't about to let either happen. That night, I opened a new folder on my desktop and labeled it documentation. I started collecting everything: emails, behavior reports, evaluation forms. I took photos of Ethan's incomplete classwork with snide red pen notes scribbled across the top. I jotted down everything Ethan told me, word for word. I made audio notes on my phone after drop-off and pickup. I didn't know where it was all going yet, but I knew it needed to exist. Because if no one else was going to see it, I would. And the more I documented, the clearer it all became. One night, I found a crumpled worksheet at the bottom of Ethan's backpack. It was a writing prompt: describe a time you felt proud. Ethan had written about building a solar system model from scratch and explaining the moons of Jupiter to his cousin. His handwriting was messy, but enthusiastic. At the bottom, Ms. Trent had written, "Off topic again. This isn't science time." I felt something in me turn to ice. I asked Ethan how she responded when he turned it in. "She read it out loud to the class," he said quietly. "She said, 'Let's all try to stay on topic this time,' and then she gave it back." I stared at him. "She read it in front of everyone?" He nodded, eyes lowered. "Some kids laughed. I don't think they meant to." That was it. That was the moment. Middle hook, she wasn't just ignoring him. She was mocking him, publicly, for doing the very thing we'd worked years to help him feel confident doing. She was humiliating him for existing differently. And she knew exactly what she was doing. The next morning, I noticed a new banner hanging outside the school entrance. "Congratulations Ms. Trent, nominee for district leadership cohort." I stared at it while Ethan climbed out of the car. Leadership. Of course. She wasn't just surviving, she was climbing. The more compliant the classroom, the better her record looked. And students like Ethan didn't help that image. We were a liability. So I disappeared a little further. I let the voicemails from the school go unanswered. I skipped the winter concert, even though Ethan had one speaking line. I didn't correct the teacher when she sent home a form with the wrong accommodation checked. I let them believe I was slipping, fading, too overwhelmed to follow through. They had no idea I was watching everything. I kept collecting. I printed hard copies. I started a log with dates, quotes, and sources. I kept everything time-stamped and backed up in a cloud folder with two-step verification. I read up on district policy. I looked into state-level reporting requirements. I even reached out anonymously to an advocacy group for parents of neurodivergent kids and asked what documentation would be needed for an educational complaint. And still, I said nothing. Because some storms don't start with thunder. They start in stillness. End hook. Then one morning, Ethan handed me a folder of his graded work. I opened it, scanning the pages, until I reached the last one, a reading assessment. On the top in bright red marker, it said, "Reading level, grade 1, significant delays noted." I stared at it in silence. That week, he had read a 5th grade nonfiction book out loud to me, every word, every sentence, with perfect fluency. This wasn't a mistake. It was a fabrication. They weren't just failing him. They were falsifying him. And I finally understood, this wasn't just about Ethan. This was about every child like him that had been quietly erased. And it was time someone said the quiet part out loud. The email came on a Thursday afternoon, subject line, "Documentation flexibility approved." I almost deleted it, assuming it was another automated message. Then I saw the signature, Assistant Principal Halverson, and the to field that should have said Ms. Trent. It said my name instead. For a second, I just stared at it, not even blinking. The words blurred on the screen. I scrolled, reread, and scrolled again. It wasn't long, just 2 sentences granting Ms. Trent temporary flexibility in her reporting of IEP documentation due to high caseload volume. My stomach turned cold. It didn't sound like much, not to anyone outside the system. But I knew what it meant. It meant she could stop logging support minutes. It meant she could ignore accommodations and no one would know. It meant, legally, she could make my son disappear from the paperwork. I sat back slowly, hands trembling so badly I had to grip my coffee mug to steady them. A faint metallic taste filled my mouth, the taste that comes when adrenaline hits too fast. I imagined her in her classroom, tapping her pen against a clipboard, feeling untouchable. The system had handed her permission to neglect, and called it efficiency. I didn't delete the email. I didn't reply. I saved it 3 times, one on my desktop, one on an external drive, and one in a cloud folder labeled simply, "Proof." Then I pushed my chair back and whispered to the empty room, "You just made your last mistake, Ms. Trent." That night, I printed the email and slipped it into a binder I'd started keeping in the back of my closet. It was full of quiet, ugly truths, every red pen comment, every behavior note, every Ethan refused scribble. But this email was different. It wasn't her word against mine. It was official. A signature, a date, and an admission that she was being allowed to falsify. From that night on, I stopped second-guessing myself. For weeks, I had convinced myself maybe I was overreacting, that maybe Ethan's rough year was just bad chemistry, not something deliberate. But this was a crack in the facade. It told me everything I needed to know. The school didn't just tolerate Ms. Trent. They enabled her. So I started collecting, quietly, methodically, the way you'd build a puzzle no one else could see yet. I met with people off campus, in coffee shops, over phone calls, on walks around the lake where no one could overhear. The first was Mrs. Layton, Ethan's second-grade teacher, a woman whose classroom used to smell like lavender and pencil shavings and patience. She'd left the school last year to care for her mom. When I told her what had been happening, she didn't look surprised. She just exhaled, long and heavy, and said, "Rachel, I saw it." The eye rolls. The sighs. The way she said your son's name like it was a problem instead of a person. My throat tightened. "Would you be willing to say that?" She nodded, eyes fierce. "On paper?" "Absolutely." Then there was Andre, the paraprofessional who'd worked briefly in Ms. Trent's classroom before being reassigned. I found him on LinkedIn, teaching in another district now. When I reached out, he called me back the same day. "I knew someone would come looking eventually," he said. "I couldn't stay there." The way she treated those kids, it was cruel, but she did it with a smile. We met at a diner on a Saturday morning. He told me how Ms. Trent would record non-compliance if Ethan used his sensory headphones without permission, how she'd purposely time out his support minutes so she could claim he didn't need constant aid. He told me how she once said, "If parents want special treatment, they can pay for a private school." I sat there gripping my mug until the coffee went cold. When I asked if he'd make a written statement, he didn't hesitate. "It's time someone told the truth." That same week, I got a voicemail from another mom, Mia's. Her voice shook. "I don't know if you've heard, but Ms. Trent gave Ethan a Most Improved Behavior award at assembly. Only, the certificate had another kid's name crossed out." Everyone saw. She laughed. Said, "Recycling's good for the environment, right?" That night, Ethan showed me the paper. His fingers were tight on the edges. "It's okay, Mom." She was joking. It wasn't okay. Not even close. I waited until he was asleep, then added the certificate to my binder. A week later, Ms. Trent's name showed up again in the school newsletter, this time with a photo. "Congratulations to Ms. Trent for her nomination to the district leadership cohort." Her smile was wide, proud, polished. The kind of smile people wear when they've never been told no. At the next PTA meeting, she was center stage, running a presentation on streamlined classroom inclusion. I stood in the back of the cafeteria, arms folded, just watching. She clicked through slides filled with generic stock photos and said phrases like minimizing distractions and raising expectations. At one point, she gestured to Ethan's class and said, "Some students thrive when we reduce unnecessary accommodations. We underestimate how capable they really are when we lower the bar." The crowd nodded. A few parents clapped. I felt my heart start to pound. She was turning neglect into philosophy, and being applauded for it. After the meeting, she spotted me by the door. "Rachel," she said brightly, that sugary tone coating every word, "so glad you could come. We've all been noticing how much more independent Ethan seems lately. You must be so proud." I looked her right in the eye. "I am. He's been teaching me a lot about patience." She blinked at that, uncertain whether it was a compliment or a warning. Then she smiled again, a little tighter this time. "Keep up the good work," she said, and walked away. Middle hook, the next day, I got a call from the principal. His voice was formal but brittle. Ms. Thompson, I wanted to touch base about your recent inquiries into staff documentation. It's come to my attention you've been reaching out to former employees. That's not an appropriate avenue for communication. I gripped the phone. I'm a parent seeking clarification about my child's education. That's absolutely appropriate. He cleared his throat. We're all on the same team here. I hope we can move forward without unnecessary tension. The word team made me laugh, quietly. Of course, I said. I'd never want to make things uncomfortable. When we hung up, I sat there for a long moment, staring at the wall. Someone had tipped them off. Probably one of the parents or staff I'd spoken to. It didn't matter. Because if they were starting to worry, that meant the mask was slipping. Still, I needed to be careful. A week later, I went to the school office to request Ethan's complete academic record, all documentation, progress notes, and evaluations. The secretary, who used to smile at me every morning, now barely looked up. You'll need to put that in writing. I already did, I said, sliding the letter across the counter. It's day 14. Her expression flickered, and she stood abruptly. I'll have the assistant principal check. While I waited, I noticed Ms. Trent's framed Teacher of the Month certificate hanging near the front desk. I don't know what came over me, but I reached out and straightened the frame just slightly. It was tilted. She'd hate that. The assistant principal came out 5 minutes later, voice tight and smile professional. Ms. Thompson, we're processing your request, but as you know, some documents take time. We want to make sure everything is accurate before we release them. Accuracy, I said softly, is exactly what I'm asking for. That night, I wrote down the exchange word for word. Date. Time. Tone. The way her hand trembled slightly as she held the papers. Every detail mattered now. 2 days later, an envelope arrived at my house by certified mail. The records. I waited until Ethan was asleep, then laid everything out on the dining room table, page after page of charts, notes, progress logs. I went through them one by one, highlighter in hand, my stomach tightening more with each page. The language was off, too polished, too uniform, as if copied from a template. Then, halfway through, I found it, a report dated February 15th, describing Ethan as mostly nonverbal during peer interactions and unable to sustain topic-based engagement beyond 1 minute. I froze. That same day, he presented a group science project on volcanoes, the one another parent had filmed, the one where he stood at the front of the room, speaking for nearly 5 minutes straight about magma chambers and tectonic plates. I still had the video. His voice had been steady, confident, proud. This wasn't incompetence. It was fabrication. I picked up the paper, my hand shaking. For a second, I didn't know whether to cry or laugh. I ended up doing both, a short, choked sound that was somewhere between the two. Then I whispered to the empty kitchen, "Got you." End hook, the binder on my table was almost full now, thick with every lie they'd told. But this page, this single page, was the crack in the dam. Because one documented lie, provably false, was enough to pull the whole system down. I stared at it until the words blurred, and I realized my hands weren't shaking anymore. I was done collecting. It was time to use it. She was celebrating a lie, and I was standing 10 feet away holding the truth. That's what I kept thinking as I watched Ms. Trent raise her glass that night at the spring fundraiser. The gym was transformed with white tablecloths and cheap fairy lights, the kind of decorations that tried too hard to look elegant. Parents mingled near the punch bowl, and the school board members stood clustered at the front, smiling at their own self-importance. Ms. Trent stood at the podium, bathed in the warm glow of admiration. Her voice carried easily over the microphone, smooth, confident, rehearsed. "Every child deserves a teacher who believes in them," she said, hand over her heart. And I'm proud to work at a school that holds that standard high. My nails bit into my palm as she spoke. I watched her beam, head slightly tilted, accepting polite applause. Her dress was pressed, her lipstick perfect, her posture impeccable, every inch the model educator. I felt my pulse climbing, slow and steady, not with panic but with something colder. I leaned slightly to the woman beside me and whispered, "She's not going to be teaching much longer." The woman blinked, unsure if she'd heard right. I smiled. I waited 2 days before I pulled the lever. On Tuesday morning, while Ms. Trent was busy basking in the afterglow of her district nomination, I submitted the complaint. Not a casual email. Not a plea. A comprehensive, state-level special education grievance, meticulously compiled, organized, verified, and backed by evidence. 23 attachments, 2 signed witness statements, and 1 email that would destroy her entire defense. By Thursday, the district compliance office had already called me. "Ms. Thompson, we received your report," the investigator said, her tone unreadable. "Your documentation is substantial. We'll need to begin interviews immediately." "Take your time," I told her. "Just make sure you read everything carefully." That same afternoon, the school's mood shifted. Teachers whispered in doorways. The principal's usual cheerful greetings turned clipped. And Ms. Trent, who normally strolled through the hall like she owned it, walked a little faster, her smile stretched too tight. A week later, she stopped sending class newsletters. And then, the cracks began to show. First, a parent mentioned Ms. Trent had called her late one evening, voice trembling, asking if she'd ever felt pressured to say something positive about Ethan. The parent said no, but that she didn't appreciate being asked. Then, one of the office staff, a woman I'd known for years, pulled me aside during pickup. "You didn't hear this from me," she murmured, eyes darting toward the front desk. "But they're auditing all her files. Every student. Every report. It's bad." I nodded slowly. "Good," I said quietly. Middle hook, the next day, I got my first glimpse of her unraveling. I was early for pickup and sat in my car near the curb, engine running. Ms. Trent came out of the building, walking fast, her face pale under the fluorescent light. A district car was parked at the curb. 2 people, one with a clipboard, the other with a briefcase, followed her out. They weren't smiling. She stopped just short of the car and turned toward them, her mouth moving rapidly. I couldn't hear what she said, but her hands were gesturing wildly. Then one of the officials spoke, calmly, and held out a folder. Ms. Trent froze. Her arms dropped to her sides. She looked down, then back up, and for the first time since I'd met her, she didn't look superior. She looked small. The official said something else. Ms. Trent's lips parted, maybe to argue, maybe to beg, but no sound came out. Then she turned, walked quickly toward her car, and drove away. Ethan came out a few minutes later, backpack swinging. "Ms. Trent left before school ended," he said. "The office lady told us we have a sub tomorrow." I smiled at him in the rearview mirror. "Did she say why?" He shook his head. "No. But she looked really mad before she left." "Sometimes," I said gently, "people get mad when the truth catches up to them." That night, I poured a cup of tea, sat at the kitchen table, and opened my laptop to check the district's public board filings. There it was, personnel review pending, staff member suspended with pay pending investigation. No name listed, but I didn't need one. By the following week, the story had started spreading quietly through the parent network. One mom texted me, "Is it true she lied on student reports?" Another wrote, "My son was in her class 2 years ago." I knew something was off. Within days, whispers became conversation. And then conversation became outrage. The district couldn't contain it anymore. At the next board meeting, the room was full, parents, teachers, reporters. The superintendent tried to open with standard policy language, but people were demanding answers. One father stood up and said, "If someone like her could get this far without being checked, how many others are doing the same?" The superintendent's face reddened. "We're taking this very seriously," he said, gripping the podium. I sat in the back, not speaking, not smiling, just listening. The tension in the room was electric. They couldn't say her name publicly, not yet, but everyone knew. A few days later, I received the official letter from the state. It confirmed what I already suspected: Ms. Trent's teaching license was being formally revoked. The reason cited was falsification of student evaluation data and neglect of mandated accommodations. It didn't use emotional words. Bureaucracies rarely do. But reading it, I felt something uncoil inside me, not glee, not cruelty, just an exhale years overdue. The following Monday, her classroom door was stripped bare. Her nameplate gone. Her photos gone. Just a pale rectangle where her name used to be. I stood in the hallway that afternoon, watching parents pick up their kids. Ethan's new teacher waved from her door, smiling. "He's a joy," she called out. "He told the whole class about Saturn's moons today." Ethan ran ahead of me, chattering about his project, his voice full of life again. For the first time in months, he didn't look over his shoulder. Still, one part of me wanted to know, not for satisfaction, but for closure, how she'd taken it. A week later, I found out. A former colleague of hers, someone I barely knew but who remembered my name, stopped me outside a grocery store. "You heard what happened?" she asked softly. I hesitated. "Only that she's gone." "She tried to fight it," the woman said. "Claimed the records were tampered with, that parents had conspired against her. The board didn't buy it. They had proof." She walked out crying after the hearing. I nodded, slowly. "Thank you." That night, after Ethan went to bed, I sat in his room for a long time, listening to him breathe, the soft hum of his white noise machine filling the quiet. His science posters lined the walls, and his latest Lego bridge stretched across the dresser like an achievement. I thought about everything we'd endured, every red pen comment, every meeting that made me feel small, every moment I doubted myself, and realized something: I wasn't angry anymore. Just clear. When people talk about revenge, they imagine fire, explosions, shouting, dramatic endings. But that's not how it really feels. Real revenge is cold, methodical, almost silent. It doesn't destroy everything. It just removes the rot. End hook. A few weeks later, I received an envelope from the district. Inside was a short letter and a printed report. Following our recent review, it read, "We have implemented revised monitoring for all IEP compliance procedures and parent reporting access." At the bottom, in black ink, it said, "Thank you for bringing this matter to our attention." I folded it neatly and tucked it into the back of my binder, the same binder that had once been full of anger and evidence. Now, it felt more like a record of survival. Ethan walked in, holding a drawing, Saturn, surrounded by stars, labeled carefully in his messy handwriting. "Mom," he said proudly, "my new teacher said I should join science club next year." I smiled, my throat tight. "Of course she did." He grinned. "She said I belong there." I looked at him, at his light, his unfiltered joy, and I realized that this, not the report, not the revocation, not the quiet victory, this was the real ending. She tried to erase him. She only made him shine brighter.